Hello, my name is Todd Hull, and I am an Associate Professor of English at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, South Korea. The title of my presentation today is Formulating and Implementing Communicative Tests of Foreign Language Proficiency. In this presentation, I will talk about communicative teaching first before I talk about communicative testing. But before I even do that, I'll just go over some traditional types of testing. Then we'll get into describing communicative testing. After that, I'll talk about assessing performance on communicative tests. How do we grade our students on communicative tests? I'll give some examples of communicative tests, and I will outline how communicative testing can be done in a variety of learning and teaching environments. Communicative teaching. Well, communicative teaching involves learners engaging in authentic communication in the classroom. It is, quote, based on the idea that learning language successfully comes through having to communicate, meaning, unquote. That is a good succinct definition by the British Council. Todd Ellis adds that instruction, quote, needs to ensure that learners focus predominantly on meaning. So here the idea is that in a communicative classroom, students need to actually be communicating. They need to be doing what people do in real life, which is authentic communication. So communicative teaching does not involve things like reciting memorized dialogues, reading passages from a text out loud, and importantly, communicative teaching does not involve translating text from the native language to the target language or vice versa. Translating does virtually nothing for students' communicative abilities. What were some traditional tests and what were some of their limitations? Well, first of all, there was a quote pre-scientific testing. So this is basically grammar translation tests where basically the only test was having students translate either from the target language into their native language or vice versa. And again, this type of test is pretty much useless. And came along and developed what have been called psychosymmetric structuralist tests. These are tests like multiple choice. One improvement here was that these tests were more objective, because with a translation test, the grade primarily rests upon whether or not the teacher thinks that translations are quote-unquote good or not. And they can possibly even be influenced by how much a teacher likes or does not like a student. Things like multiple choice tests are objective. It doesn't matter how much you like or don't like a student, an answer is either right or wrong. So that was an improvement. But those tests still didn't involve authentic communication. Then there were integrative tests, and those were tests like cloze tests. Now, in cloze tests, where students have to fill in the blank, those have the advantage of requiring students to actually process real language, but while an improvement, they still did not constitute actual communication. So, what is communicative testing? Well, the best formulation came from the University of Hawaii Manoa Professor James Brown, and he lays out 5 criteria for communicative tests. I consider the first 3 of his criteria to be absolutely mandatory, the 4th to include as many of its components as possible, but not all if not possible. And the 5th should be included when possible, but it is rarely possible, as I will explain later. First criterion is meaningful communication. In a communicative test should involve and require meaningful communication. I'll elaborate on that later. A communicative test should require unpredictable language input. Students shouldn't know beforehand what they're going to be tested on exactly. More about that in a moment. And the third major criterion is creative language output. So students should be required to have creative language output. Fourth criterion is to use as many of the 4 basic skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking as possible. Now that's great, but not completely necessary in my opinion. And the 5th criterion is an authentic situation. So mirror a situation that might occur in the real world. This is the hardest criterion to satisfy, and I think it is rarely achievable for reasons that I will explain later. Meaningful communication, what's that? Well, communicative tests must involve actual communication, where students actually have to really communicate ideas. They have to really have real world communication. So that excludes fill in the blank or multiple choice grammar questions. That doesn't involve real communication. Asking students to answer comprehension questions, that doesn't involve real communication. Reciting a memorized dialogue or reading a passage of a text out loud, those don't require real communication. And translating, that doesn't require communication and is virtually useless. So for meaningful communication, learners must actually communicate to complete the test successfully. A communicative test has to require unpredictable language input. So students should not know beforehand what language they will encounter on the test, because in real communication, people do not know what the person they're talking to is going to say before they say it. Now, you shouldn't just throw things at random at students. All of the questions on the test should relate to things that have been addressed in class, but the specifics should be new to learners. Creative language output. In real life, people don't communicate by reciting memorized scripts. Language output on a communicative test should be situation specific, so it should be about the specific situation that the instructor asks on the test, and it should be in response to unpredictable input. And it should require output which is creative and unscripted, just like a real-life conversation would entail. Those are the 3 major criteria. Now, it's a bonus if you can use on your tests as many of the 4 basic skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking as possible. It's great, you can do that, but it's not mandatory. The main focus should be on communication. Can students successfully communicate their ideas? So, try to integrate as many of the skills as possible, but don't do it if it'll make the test inauthentic or unwieldy. Authentic situation. This is the one that will be the rarest to be able to include, because most courses don't allow authentic real-life situations like a hotel clerk and a guest, or an airline counter employee and a passenger. If your course is revolving around that, then that's great. You can include it. But these situations are mostly possible in ESP courses, English for Specific Purposes courses. So how do we grade students on communicative tests? The main thing is to focus on learner success in communicating their ideas. In other words, focus on use rather than usage. What does that mean? Well, usage entails things like grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, and focusing on usage docks students for grammar errors, poor pronunciation, etc. And that is not what we want on a communicative test. On a communicative test, we want to focus on how well students communicate their ideas. Now, instructors may want to include evaluations of things like grammar and pronunciation and vocabulary use as a small part of their evaluations, but it should just be a small part. Assessment should focus primarily on use, the successful communication of ideas. Okay, as mentioned before, ESP, English for Specific Purposes. This is the one context that can often fulfill all 5 criteria in ESP contexts. So, for example, a learner could practice being an executive assistant where they simulate various duties on that job. Other examples are the aforementioned hotel reception and airport check-in counter situations. Others might include bank tellers, postal clerks, and cell phone customer service representatives. If you have an ESP situation, by all means do that, but most classes are not ESP classes. Another communicative testing environment is CBI, which is content-based instruction. Content-based instruction involves learners engaging with texts and topics about a variety of academic topics like science, art, and literature, as well as current issues, history, and politics, etc. So in a CBI classroom, learners engage with material that was originally designed for native speakers, but is incorporated into a language learning curriculum. Example of a communicative test in a CBI classroom could be in groups of 3 or 4, students are given an opinion related to a topic discussed in class. For example, cultural diversity benefits my country. The students then respond to this opinion in writing, usually by agreeing or disagreeing with that opinion. Then each student tells their group members their opinions, and the group members have to listen and take notes. So this test constitutes meaningful communication because students actually have to communicate ideas and group members have to actually comprehend real ideas about real things. It involves unpredictable language input because the students don't know that the specific question was cultural diversity benefits my country. Maybe the question could have been cultural diversity is bad for my country. Maybe the question could be renewable energy is something that my country should strive for, something like that. So there's unpredictable language input. And then because the language input is unpredictable, students are required to have situation-specific creative language output that speaks directly to the unpredictable language input. Speaking and listening skills are required both to communicate and to comprehend ideas. And writing is also used when students take notes. So that fulfills quite a few of the criteria of a communicative test and qualifies indeed as a communicative test. What if you are constrained by a non-communicative teaching environment? In some cases, teachers have to teach grammar-based curriculum or something like that. But even in these situations, communicative tests can be used. For example, past tense. Learners could relate a memorable experience from their past. They could tell their group members. Group members have to listen to that, take notes, and ask questions. That all involves authentic communication, listening, speaking, and writing. For countable and uncountable nouns, students could be given a list of nouns, both countable and uncountable. They could then write a story incorporating as many of those nouns as they can, making sure to use them correctly. Again, other students in the group would listen to their story, take notes, and ask questions. All of this involves authentic communication, unpredictable language output, creative language output, and the skills of speaking, listening, and writing. Comparatives and superlatives could be practiced by having students describe friends, family, celebrities, etc. And again, they would tell their group members their message, their stories, their comparisons, and the group members would listen, take notes, and ask questions. So all of these constitute communicative tests, even in non-communicative environments. So communicative teaching should be accompanied by communicative testing. Just as real conversations involve authentic communication, unpredictable language output and unpredictable language input and creative language output, so should communicative tests. Communicative tests can be used in a variety of educational environments such as ESP and CBI, but they can also be used in non-communicative environments such as grammar-based curricula. So if teachers want to teach communication, they should also test communication, and they can do that in almost any environment in which they are put. Finally, thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to present at this conference. I really appreciate it.